evening, folks. Thank you so much for joining. Hi, Lenlise. Hi, Gemma. Hi, Ayana. Renee. How things going on all the end? So I'm trying to get into the mood because we're talking about mood this evening. Hi, Matthew. Hi, Jennifer. So, today I want us to talk about work and workplaces, colleagues, co-workers, and the places that we're working in. What triggered this topic for me was a conversation I was having a couple of weeks ago with some friends. We were all talking about work, and I was talking about how much I enjoy working from home. And they were talking about how much they don't enjoy working from home. And I was listening to them talk about it, and I was thinking to myself, all of the things that they are missing about the workspace, I'm not missing at all. And then I started thinking about my entire work career or life working. I started working when I was 19, went into a couple small companies doing like editing stuff. So like writing and editing. Daniel, you're the worst. You're still live in Bill yet. I don't have to ask people to build a live. I good. I know that we're gonna get all of the views that we need to get this evening. So I started at the age of 19 in publishing. That's the best way to put it. In the publishing industry. Moved for a period of time to working in the yachting industry. Then went back into working in media. Then from media, I moved into education. And it's been a wide-ranging experience. And in different workplaces, I would have had to deal up with different kinds of bosses, different kinds of colleagues. I would have dealt with people who were supportive and people who were always backstabbing you, trying to pull you down, all kind of nonsense. So, hi Onika, nice to see you. I know you were looking forward to this topic. So I said to myself, I want to talk about how we deal up with and how we cope with toxic workspaces, and how we cope with co-workers and colleagues that are toxic as well. And yes, Nicole, I'm glad to see you on here. The media workspace was very, very, very special. But I don't want to talk about the workspaces yet. I want to bring on a friend of mine. This is a lady that I met a number of years now. And she has done a lot of different things in her life as well. But now she functions as an organizational analyst. So she goes into companies, looks at what's wrong, what needs fixing, what needs done differently or otherwise, especially in terms of how people interact with each other. And she agreed to give us some of her time this evening. So I'm bringing on Miss Kathleen Stroud. Hi, how are you doing, Kathleen?
Hi, Rhoda. Good
how
to
you doing?
see you.
How things?
I'm well.
Good.
Well.
Good. Thanks for taking the time.
How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for taking the the time to be with us here this evening. So let me go back to talking about my experience. 19, I started working in a small publishing house. It was an American couple, an African American couple. They'd come to Trinidad and they'd set up a business. They set up a magazine that they were publishing, and they had sent out something to the University of the West Indies saying basically they were looking for an intern, and they were willing to pay. At that point in time, it was just $500 a month, and you were supposed to be doing like 2 days a week. So like 8 days for the month, not full days, but like 8 half days, and you'd come in basically to like read and edit stuff. And when I look back, I mean, after I left the job, I realized how much they were asking me to do and how little they were paying me to do what they were asking me to do, right? And the attitude was also a very condescending sort of attitude. How long did I last there for? I stuck around long enough to get some experience under my belt, because when you're that age, when you're 19, you're really looking for work experience. You're not even thinking that much about the salary. You just want to know that you're getting work, you're doing some work. So I started working with them, with them for about 6 months, and then after 6 months left and moved on to somewhere else. My experiences from then to now have been wide ranging, and I think I'm in a better position now, like more assertive as an individual and everything, when I'm in a workspace. But Kathleen, the Trinidad and Tobago work environment, let's talk about that first, right? We know we have a history of colonization. We know that as a result of this history of colonization, there are all of these hierarchies where persons are in positions of power and they can abuse that power. What has been your experience of our work environment as in your capacity now as somebody who's doing organizational change?
Yep. You know, Rhoda, when you called me and asked me to if I would be willing to have this chat around toxic behavior,
toxic behaviors in the workspace.
behavior in the workspace, I sat down and I started jotting down, some notes of what came to mind and so on. And I noticed the most curious thing, or maybe not so curious after all. I noticed that 9 out of 10, seriously, of what was coming to me just off the top of my head, because I really was going for exactly what you just asked me from my experience.
Yeah.
9 out of 10 of those examples or instances that were coming to me were cases of management.
Yeah.
And the toxic implications and toxic results of certain kinds of management behavior. And I'm talking about from the board of management to senior executives to middle managers and so on. So I found out that was interesting because for some reason I got the impression when you asked the question that you were probably thinking of corrosive and dysfunctional behaviors on just, among the rank and file on the floor.
Actually, no, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it in multiple ways. One,
okay,
rank and file.
Yeah.
Yes, right, rank in terms of peer to peer. Then I was also thinking about it in terms of having people who are higher than I, so people who are in management and executive management. Now, I work with the University of the West Indies. That's not a secret. I also run my own business. That is not a secret either. And the company that I run is a small company, and everything is done virtually. So I don't have a physical office space. It's been a virtual office space from the jump. So everybody that I'm dealing up with, it's via email or phone calls, or sometimes we will do video meetings, that sort of thing. So it occurred to me that outside of the office space, there's a different dynamic for how you end up interacting with people, right? I also worked in secondary education for more than a decade. And that was its own interesting workspace, because you have peer-to-peer, then you'd also have heads of department, vice principal, principal. And in all of these spaces, you have all of these power dynamics. So, before we jump into talking about workspaces and toxic workspaces, let me ask you to give me a working definition. Give all of us here a working definition about toxic. So we know how
Yeah.
we're talking about it. I don't want to be
Yeah.
using the word toxic
Yeah.
randomly. I want to use it properly.
Agreed. And to tell you the truth, I Googled it to see what Google thought. And I have to say, Google was just not
What did Google think?
Google Google said something about behaviors that had a negative impact on people, and I thought, no, no, that does not quite cut it. So I wrote one. Maybe I might sell it to Wikipedia or something. And it goes something like this. So um, my experience at toxic workplaces is that they are environments where it takes a hell of a lot of energy just to be able to function.
Yeah.
Where you are so drained, it's like you have two jobs. You have your actual job that you're being paid for, and then you have the job of surviving from day to day,
Yes.
from 8 to 4 or whatever your work hours are. And as a result, a lot of toxic environments are just simply not productive.
So
So they're
I want you to stick a pin right there.
okay.
Like right there. Because we were talking earlier today, you and I, before this interview. And one of the things that occurred to me after after I got off the call with you was that the days that I felt most productive were the days I went into the office very early or stayed and worked in the office late after everybody had left. So once I got into the office like 6 o'clock, most people don't get into the office until like 9:30, right? And that's because most of our workday starts at around 10 o'clock when many classes start. So between 6 to 9, once I was in the office and it was quiet, I would get a lot of work done. And I liked being at work then. And then if I stayed late in the evening, by 5:36, the majority of the office has cleared out. And I would work until 8, 9 o'clock in the night sometimes and then come home. And I'd be fine, at peace. So when I tell you at peace, perfect peace. So that
Yeah.
point you've made there about a toxic workspace is where you kind of like have two jobs at the same time.
Yeah.
It didn't
Yeah.
even occur to me until you said that I was
Yeah.
basically trying to navigate two
Yeah.
spaces at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. Yes. And it's absolutely, I don't know who coined the phrase, but I mean it couldn't be more aptly described. Because I mean it's toxic and poison. I mean it's just the exact opposite to the kind of environment that human beings need to thrive and have a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction and do what they're supposed to do. And some um, workplaces, which is why the Google definition was shockingly benign, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Some are positively demoralizing, Rhoda. Um, I mean, and when you talk to people who have really been through the mill um, in a corrosive work environment, they talk about how I mean yes, there's a mental illness and depression, but there's also, I mean, people get really physically ill, people get heart
Yeah.
palpitations, people get stroke,
There's a lady on the comment thread here who's saying that she gets like anxiety attacks as she gets closer to work.
there you go,
So
there you
imagine
go.
something that you have to do because it's the only way you can
Yep.
pay bills, etc.
Yep.
You are
Yep.
forcing yourself to go
Yep.
into this space that is making you unwell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And people talk about, I mean, there's a syndrome, on Sunday around 3, like it hits around 3. You start to feel this mild at first depression coming on, and by about 9 o'clock, so you're in full blown something akin to depression, and it is nigh, you know.
Oh, it seems as if there's some data fluctuation going on. So hopefully it will be sorted out. Actually, what I should do is let me put her out of the studio and let her come back in. So while we're waiting on Miss Stroud to come back into the studio, there she is. She's calling and coming back in. Okay, she's having some problems with data, it looks like. So yes, let me look at some of the comments that came up here. So Jennifer Frederick is saying, when you stand up for your rights, they make an example of you so that other workers will think twice about doing the same. I agree with that, Jennifer. That does happen in workspaces. That's very, very, very disconcerting. Hi.
Hi. Don't know, my internet is...
No, it happens. It happens. And you see, with the rain these days, the fluctuating has been really bad. Really bad.
My friend Keith Liquai, who's a group relations practitioner, as I am sometimes, would say we lost the connection because we were onto something.
But that
and
point,
the system doesn't want that.
Doesn't want us to have that conversation.
Yes,
we have to have it though, because a whole bunch of people, as soon as you talked about that Sunday evening blues that sets in, they started commenting. They're like, they can't sleep on a Sunday night.
Yeah,
they begin to have anxiety.
Yeah. So, I mean, and this is so common. It's amazing. And as you said, people are by the scruff of their necks because you have a mortgage to pay, you have rent to pay, you have to put food on the table. And so, I think this is one of the reasons I do what I do, because it's really heartbreaking to see what people have to go through to live.
Kathleen, if I can ask you to explain to the audience, because I have a sense of it. How exactly did you get into doing what you do now?
Okay. Well, that's actually, there are many strands, I suppose, to your story that eventually come together, to bring you to a certain place. But the very last place I worked, I tell people, was my introduction and my baptism of fire. Where toxic work environments are concerned. So just out of respect, for people, we'll keep it super anonymous and vague, although the company no longer exists and the principals are dead, but still, we'll be respectful and so on. So I had been a teacher, and then I left teaching. I went into life insurance, had a good time there. And then I was a marketing, sales, and distribution manager at a medium-sized company. I had been there for about 3 months. 3 months. And one day I'm summoned to the GM's office. And, I sit and he says to me, you hired a fella named, let's call him John Smith. You hired a fella named John Smith in the warehouse recently? And I said, yeah. Something wrong? No, not that I know of. But you have to fire him. So I said, something wrong. What did he do? And the response was this. Well, nothing yet. But his brother used to work here a couple years ago, and he was a thief. And we don't want anybody from that family working here. I wish there was some part of this story that I am embellishing or exaggerating for you. That is what I was told. So I sit there in abject bewilderment. And I'm saying, but I can't fire somebody. I said, I mean, I understand your concern, but I mean, we could watch him. I could ask the warehouse manager to, keep an eye on him, but, I said, and the response was, no, you have to fire him. And I
Even
said,
though
but
he's
I
done
can't.
nothing wrong, you have to
He's
fire
done
him.
nothing to fire him because because his brother used to work there and he stole stuff.
Right.
So I said, um, but I can't do that. Understand? I'm there 3 months. I'm there 3 months. I have, financial imperatives like everybody else, right?
Bills.
Pressure. And he said, so what you're saying is that you're refusing to carry out a directive. And I said, well, I'm not refusing to carry out a directive, but I can't do this. Anyway, I'm dismissed. I go back to my office, and you're just, I mean, nothing prepares you for, certainly nothing in my work career up until that time prepared me for that. And I swiveled around to my computer, and I typed a memo to the CEO. I explained what had happened, and I typed up the resignation. I knocked on his door, the CEO, and I rested it on his desk. Cut a long story short, he dealt with it. Apparently, I wasn't there, but he dealt with it, and then knocked on my door maybe half an hour later and said, I've resolved this. You don't have to fire anybody. So you still want to resign? What happened, what ensued in the next 4 months, because in 4 months I was out of there, is that my life was made a living hell. I had to account for, let us say we sold widgets, for every widget. And then I had to account for the ones that were bent, the ones that had a dent in them, the ones that were dusty. You hear what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
had to dot every I and cross every T. And then they undermining with my staff. So all of a sudden, my sales staff giving me a set of attitude. I don't know where it's coming from. People refusing to do, people telling me, let's call him Mr. X. Mr. X said to do this, and so on and so on and so on. And then after a while, Rhoda, you can't function. You can't function. And your days start getting longer and longer because there's so much pressure. There's so much pressure. People waiting for you to make a mistake. The place is like a minefield, and eventually it just became too much. And I'll tell you one last thing. The day I left, that's to tell you, and this is how I know, and this is how I understand where people are in working environments like this. The day I left, I didn't get up that morning, and while I was getting ready and dressing, I didn't get up that morning planning to leave. The day I left, I went to work as normal. I got into my office as normal. I got my cup of tea and thing. And then I noticed, but, like I couldn't get started. I couldn't get started, I couldn't get started. And then, that little voice inside, I just heard it say, Stroudy, today is the day. Today is the day.
Yeah.
You can't do this anymore. So it's almost as if, and I know many people who have had this experience, it's almost as if your body is always like a week ahead of you. It's almost like physically, every cell in your body knows that it cannot survive. right?
Maybe because
And
the environment has become too stressful, like they've hit
be-
peak capacity of what the body can take.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, of what the body and mind can take. But there's something about the body I feel is just it's a step ahead because I just couldn't function. I couldn't function. I couldn't function,
Yeah.
and that was the day I typed up a resignation and I asked my secretary to bring me two boxes, and that was that.
So
Now I am. Mhm.
no, no, you go ahead. Go ahead. Finish what you're going to say.
I am not at all suggesting that that is the model for how one should proceed. Um,
I don't think that's what you're doing. I don't think that's what you're
you know,
suggesting. On the comment thread here, I mean, there are lots of things that people have been saying. They're talking about their experiences. They're talking about micromanagement, not being able to cope with staff members. What about a strategic coworker undermining you and your work for personal gain? There are all kinds of things that are happening here. So perhaps we can start talking about how we identify toxic behavior.
um, I'm not sure how to approach that question. But what I would say is this: when we're talking about um, um, toxic behavior, Rhoda, we need to bear in mind that there's a lot of complexity involved.
Right.
Right? There's plenty complexity involved. So we tend to focus. I might be going off your question here, but this is related. We focus on the person or persons who are behaving in a certain way, and so on, and we might lose sight of bigger dynamics in the either in the organization or the organization's context, or even in the societal context, that are also shaping people's behavior. And I think it's important to go there and to put that on the table, because we're not just having an academic discussion, as
No, we're not.
you
So,
had
what are
indicated.
some of these larger?
Right. So what I'm saying is, it's important to check those out, because if we want to change it, then we have to look at the layers. Sometimes they're layers, right? So I definitely want us to come back to your question
Sure.
about you know people and what it looks like. Yeah,
Sure.
we will come back to that, and I actually would like to. I really want to touch on some. We will touch on both, but I'd like to touch on some manager behaviors.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. So two people erupt in a very conservative environment. I mean, that kind of behavior is unheard of. Somebody slams something down, somebody busts two pieces of obscene language, and it's bad. And then that sets off for weeks, um, you know, bad vibes, bad energy, and then it starts to spread, because this one friends don't want to have nothing to do with that one friends, and you know how it goes, and it's spreading.
Yeah.
Right. When that situation was brought to me, it was brought in a way that suggested, well, this is an interpersonal conflict. Maybe we could do something around communication skills and behavioral styles and different personality styles. That's where we tend to go. But what was really, really fascinating, the more we got in um, to the life of that department, is the many, many layers of um, what contributed to those eruptions and to that toxic atmosphere and those toxic relationships that seemed to be interpersonal. And it went something like this. So one of the first things that sort of emerged was so we were talking about a department, was that department had a very interesting history. And so there was stuff in its DNA. And it kind of went like this. Initially, there were two separate departments. And then they were merged. But they were merged under the manager of one of the previous departments. And that manager, these things, and again, these things are not, I think, in many cases, not necessarily intentional. I don't think it was anticipated that this is how things would have developed. But that manager carried on with the relationships that manager had with the people that manager had worked with in the past. So the relationships that manager had with the original set were always closer, friendlier than the department that was merged.
Yes.
And so over time, there emerged a them and us.
A hierarchy.
A hierarchy, a them and us.
One better than the other.
And definitely one better than the other. Some animals more equal than others. Yes, a them and us. So so that situation erupted in a situation where there was this larger dynamic. And not surprisingly, it erupted between a them and an us. Yeah? So there was that going on. And then when you peeled away a little more, you realize that the particular individual, around whom a lot of the focus was, eventually, said, I am just so exhausted. I am so drained. I am so exhausted. And what emerged around that was, so was everybody. So was everybody.
So,
but hold on, get this piece. But nobody was saying it. Nobody was saying it. Why? Because in this particular organization, and I would suspect in that particular sector, to say that you are overwhelmed is equal to saying that you are incompetent. And so nobody says they're tired. Nobody says they're overwhelmed. And so a psychiatrist or a psychologist might view this person, who had the outburst that started the whole thing, as what they call a symptom bearer. So this was somebody who was expressing something on behalf of the whole, expressing something that in a culture like that, people don't say. So that's what I'm saying when I say it's really important, especially if you want to change it. So for example,
wait, stick up in. What is really important? When you say it's really important,
right.
What is the that is really important?
Right. The it that's really important is that when you're looking at behavior that you regard as toxic, it's very important to seek out complexity, to seek out other factors and forces in the organization beyond the personalities and individuals involved that also may be shaping the behavior that you are seeing and experiencing.
Right. And I'm not challenging the need to look at the macro picture, the wider picture.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of things that happen in workplaces that people think are normal. Like it doesn't hit them. So the same way you could tell me that in that department that was merged, nobody would say that they are tired. And because, it could lead to them being perceived in a particular way. But there are lots of folks who don't realize or who don't grasp or who don't understand that unspoken pressure to
Yes.
never say that you are tired, that's
Yes.
unhealthy. So
Yes.
if I was to ask somebody in a situation like that, well, do you think that, the department has an unhealthy or a toxic environment? They may not necessarily realize that that is something that is unhealthy about the environment.
Exactly. Exactly. And the point I'm trying to make is that if you want to change it, you see, in situations like that, sometimes the knee jerk is to transfer that person or fire them or so on. And what you will find most of the time is that even if you got rid of the person exhibiting the toxic behavior and whatever, it doesn't get rid of the problem. Somebody else takes their place because it wasn't just coming. That's the point I'm making. It wasn't just coming from that person, you know?
So
So, okay, so
basically,
let's, mhm,
walking away from the job or firing persons doesn't necessarily change the environment.
does not necessarily change the environment because there are other features and factors in that environment that are producing those behaviors. So let's go back to your question.
Sure.
So one of the toxic behaviors that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to is people in the workplace who just will not pull their weight. I mean, to the point where, I do a lot of work with supervisors. And I am always trying to understand. I mean, okay, I'm being facetious. I understand, if a boss is breathing down your neck, you have your deliverables, you have your deadlines, and you have a bump on a log of a direct report who simply will not do what they have to do. After a while, you can't continue to be going to your manager and saying, well, so and so, I'm waiting on so and so to do this or to complete this so that I could do this and so on. And so the average supervisor goes and does it him or herself, and I mean, really, I have myself, but you are doing your work to your direct reports work because, you know, because you are feeling the direct pressure of the person to whom you have to report.
Now,
Um, mhm,
okay, so to tap into what you just said there, they're
mhm.
doing the other person's job, and I guess maybe they're doing the other person's job because they want to avoid a confrontation, avoid unnecessary conflict, avoid having to unravel the problem. And I get that the avoidance there is entirely wrong. Or maybe they don't know how to get the person to pull their weight. So, how do they deal with that?
Well, um, avoidance is, exactly what you said there. The longer you avoid this, yeah, is the more normal um, it becomes. So that would usually be my first, um, port of call. Let's say, that people in supervisory and management positions and so on have to develop a certain amount of expertise in having difficult conversations. And a lot of the time, Rhoda, a lot of the time, I would say more than half the time, what is showing up as toxic behavior, let's say this particular toxic behavior of somebody who consistently just does not do what they have to do, doesn't complete tasks, and so on, is that there's something else going on. There's something else going on. All right. They have, I don't know, whatever. And so a lot of the time, a sit down and that, a sit down and a conversation, not a conversation that's um, threatening and disrespectful, but one that has you may not say it in these words, but the message that's underneath everything else that you have to say is, I'm here to support you, I want you to win, but I need for you to correct this. And if you don't, this, and that will be the consequences. And notice I'm saying consequences and I'm not saying punishment. So those difficult conversations have to be had, or else, you know, it's not going to change. It's not going to change. But let's talk a little bit more about some more toxic behaviors. And I really, really want to talk a little bit about what happens at management level. Let's start at the board. And everything I am saying to you, I mean, obviously everything is anonymous and whatever, but these are real. So a huge problem in this place is people in management positions not respecting boundaries. So, how is it that a manager, a member of the management team, knows, can give you a ball by ball commentary on what took place or what takes place at board meetings? And by the time, and I mean, not even the CEO, right? So this person has the scoop. So think about this. I am the CEO, and there's this manager who is my direct report as CEO, yeah, who has a direct line to the deliberations on the board, who knows stuff way, and whether I ever find out or not, but way before me, and so on. That sets up, so obviously there's someone on the board who does not fully appreciate how absolutely damaging and dangerous, and what the implications and ramifications down the road throughout the organization is for not being discreet about what happens at board meetings and so on. And what happens? This person just becomes so emboldened. Everybody in the organization is afraid of them because this person has a direct line to the board. Everybody knows that. Yeah? And so then there are people who will want to now, ingratiate themselves.
Right. So they curry favor with that person.
Exactly. And then, and so all of a sudden on the management team now, it's almost like you have a formal CEO and an informal one, and there are trust issues and so on. And then those managers have to work together. And remember, each one of those managers has a function in the organization, and it goes, you see what I'm saying? It's just a ripple effect. And where did it start? It started with a board member who could just goes completely against boundaries, rules about boundaries. So that's a big one. And if we stay with boundaries, there's one that I'm sure a lot of your listeners will identify with. When a manager repeatedly gives directives, a senior manager repeatedly gives directives to a junior manager's direct report. So this manager reports to me, but I am in the habit, and this is, without informing that person or whatever, but I am in the habit of, I'd pick up the phone and I would call that person's direct report and give them some work to do, send them off, to do something. Yeah. And I do not inform their manager. Their manager now, there's something, obviously that person wasn't twiddling their thumbs. Their manager now, they haven't completed, so because they leave what they're supposed to be doing because the big man on top called. Who's going to say, well, I can't do that right now? Well, some people might, but a lot of people don't. And then you see, that causes, I mean, a lot of static. You are undermining the authority of this junior manager, that this junior manager needs. How does this junior manager now um, how does this junior manager now operate with a certain degree of credibility and authority when when you are setting things up, you know, for their staff to, you know, disregard what you have asked them to do because, well, you know, higher ups. And and why these things are so damaging, and why I think is why I think, as I was saying to you earlier, I could mostly think of examples with, you know, on the management tier layer of the organization, is because when managers behave in certain ways, they model behaviors for the rest of the organization. That's the toxicity.
And so everybody else is liable to replicate the behavior.
Yes, yes, you do what we say in organizational development jargon. You establish that that's the way things are done around here. That's the way we roll. And so and so that kind of behavior seeps through every layer, and then you find that junior manager will be doing that, you know, with his supervisor's direct reports, because we do that, you know. And so you set up a culture that says this is the way we use power um, in this place.
And so everybody else uses power in that way. That's how they're going to continue to use power in the organization, whether they're in a management
Exactly.
position or not, right?
Exactly. And that is how managers leave toxicity in their wake. So even if you leave, you have made a footprint. You have, you know, because of your position in that organization, high visibility, long reach, plenty influence, and so on. Just by the way you used your managerial position and how you conducted yourself and how you treated people. Not to mention, let's go there one time. Managers who um, humiliate people in front of their, you know, they won't call you into their office to give you um, not so good feedback. You know, they actually wait until there's a, you know, and they let you have it for everyone to hear. They shout, they insult, and so on. When you set up, when you model those kinds of behaviors in organizations, that is how you toxify the environment, and
Now,
you leave
Kathleen,
a mark.
Kathleen, one of the points that someone made on the comment thread here is that a lot of what you're describing sounds like the public sector, the entire public sector. All right? When you talked about
That's interesting.
people not pulling their weight in terms of work, then when you're talking
Yeah.
about from the top down, from the top management level, there's a particular a particular approach to running things, doing things, flexing power and flexing one's muscles. And that's a lot of persons are thinking that resembles the public sector, but it's also there in the private sector, wouldn't you say?
Well, that's really fascinating, because I was drawing most of those examples from the private sector. That's really, really interesting. You know, where the public sector is concerned, I'll tell you what I in my experience, what toxicity looks like. It looks like cynicism. It looks
Right.
like, you know, whatever. You know, let me give you an example. Um, and I want to come back to this performance thing. But yeah, so Citizen X goes to a public, um, to a government office to get a document that we all have to get. So you go and you pay and you get your little receipt and you go to the window You go to the window to get the little slip of paper that they stamp and sign that you have to come back to get document X. Yeah? And whilst you're there, there's a little sign on the window saying, collect in 7 working days. So the person behind the window passes your little slip and says, come back in 2 weeks. And you, with your foolish little self, say, but the sign says 7 working days. And that person behind the window looks you straight in the eye. They don't blink, they don't flinch, and they say, so you just believe everything you read? That's the kind of toxicity that I see, a lot of the time in that kind of just complete comfort almost, with very low productivity.
Low
Imagine that.
productivity. Yes.
So imagine that. So there's absolutely no stressing around something that should take a certain amount of time, taking twice the amount of time. And that is something that we should add to the definition of these, when we're talking about toxic environments, because at the end of the day, yes, there are all these, and we never got into, I mean, there's some really horrid stories of, the kinds of devastating impacts that toxic environments have on people. But it's not just the people working in the organizations or institutions who are affected. It's the users, Rhoda, like you and me. I mean, accident and emergency in Port of Spain or Mount Hope workplaces.
Yes.
And if there are toxic
employees there, and if the environment there is a toxic environment, if we show up there requiring help, we get impacted.
Absolutely.
It's the same thing I want to add in the education sector. In schools, if the workplace, if the staff room and the management of the school, if they're displaying toxic behavior, if the environment is toxic, the children get impacted by that, because they're going to deal up with teacher apathy, they're going to deal up with aggression from teachers, they're going to deal up with discrimination from teachers. The parents then now have to deal up with a child who is afraid to go to school, or doesn't like to go to school, or hates the aspects of the school environment, and so they will act out at home. So there are lots of domino effects to a toxic environment.
Exactly. Decision making, you won't be making the best decisions and so on. And then, of course, right back to where we started, people will leave. And who's to say it's the toxic people who are leaving? The toxic people don't leave, They stay, they dig their heels in and they stay, right? You lose good people. And if it's in a school environment, who's suffering? When the good teachers leave, who's losing out? The user group, the children. So yeah, I agree with you. The domino effect, is also one of the the domino effect on especially the effects on the user groups in organizations like what we call human service organizations, like hospitals and schools and homes, homes for orphans and so on.
Then what do we do in a situation like that? I mean, I left secondary teaching, and I left secondary teaching not because I didn't like teaching the children. I left it because I really didn't like the managerial, the management aspect of things. I felt that the way in which the school was being run, the way in which things were taking place, you always had a core group of teachers who were pulling everybody else's weight in a sense. And so I
Yeah.
had the opportunity to leave that and move on to something else. But not everybody has the opportunity to leave. Not everybody has the
Yes.
opportunity to move on. Not
Yeah.
everybody, not everybody has the opportunity to find another pasture with grass. So
Yep.
what do they do?
What do you do? So yes, but first, Rhoda, if you're losing sleep, you're losing weight, you're depressed, you're taking this thing at home, um, if your life is falling apart, you have to leave. Having said that, having said that, and I am not an HR person, but what I do know um, is that people have options. Um, so, for example, I was chatting with an HR manager, and she was saying, many people have um, the opportunity to use employment assistance programs, EAP services, but there's a curious stigma attached to EAP to people. People think once you start going to EAP, that means you're mad or you're depressed. And well, I mean, remember, organizations are situated in a wider culture, and in this culture, if you tell anybody you're going to a therapist, well, most people wouldn't say they're going to a therapist. Right? Everybody in the States, it's fashionable to have a therapist,
I
but
go to a
here it
therapist.
means,
I enjoy going to my
there you
therapist. As a
go.
matter of fact, it's
Absolutely.
one of the hours
Absolutely.
in my week that I look forward
Yep.
to.
Right. But the average Joe does not, walk with that mindset around therapy. And, what that HR person was saying is that, what a different place the workplace might be if people avail themselves. She said many, many places give people 3 to 5 sessions. And I mean, you don't have to wait until, you're stressed out. Here is an opportunity to have confidential conversations, just to process things, because here's the thing: when you're struggling to cope in a corrosive, dysfunctional place, one of the things you have to guard against is not creating two problems by going and talking to the wrong people. So it's really not usually a good idea, because you really, you don't want to,
When you say
as I
talking to the
say,
wrong
have the
people,
problem that you're facing
do
plus
you mean as part of the EAP
it's
program?
co-workers.
Oh, okay, okay.
No, 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 no. So the question is around coping. So you're there and you're trying to cope, and so I know someone who said one day she was in the elevator and she couldn't stop the tears, and somebody happened to be there, and of course, what happened, and she spilled her guts, and then what happened? It ended up right,
All
you
over,
know,
all
uh,
over, all over.
absolutely. And so, yeah, so the point I'm making is, be very careful. You're in these situations, who you talk to, which is why options like the EAP are probably better than, um, you know, um, talking these things out with coworkers, because you have the problem, and then you give yourself another problem because you're wondering who they talk to and who they tell,
So
right?
I want to add to what you're saying there. It's the
Mm-hmm.
thing that I enjoy the most when I'm talking to my therapist. And I guess that's how I use my therapist, really, as EAP. So we meet once every 2 weeks for usually it's about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of talk about what's going on with me or what has gone on with me since the last time we had a chat. Sometimes we discuss coping mechanisms, and then it will be like, well, you test the coping mechanism for 2 weeks, and then after you
Right.
come back and you kind of give it a review, and maybe a couple of weeks after that you'll give it a review again, and then you
Yep.
keep talking about things. And I mean, there are times when something will strike me, and I'll be like,
Yep.
"Ooh, I need to talk about this, so I need to raise this." And because
Yep.
we're both on WhatsApp together, I'll send a WhatsApp message saying, "Can you pencil this down for us to discuss the next time we meet?"
Yes.
Because I may not
Yes.
necessarily
Yes.
remember. And my therapist will pencil it down. And when we meet, we have that conversation about it. And it helps
Yep.
me to kind of, if I'm to use a diary or a planner as a for example,
Yep.
as the analogy here, it helps me to kind of plot things. Like think
Yes.
about, this is going to happen at work. This is
Yes.
likely to be an issue I have to deal with soon. That is likely to crop up. And to think in advance about how I'm going to
Yep.
approach the issues. And these are issues that in the past would have been problematic for me, but now not anymore because I have new approaches.
Yes, and you know what you're describing? Agency. So instead of something having you, you have it. So you get a sense of, well, I am in the driver's seat. I am, I am navigating, I
I'm
am
taking charge.
navigating
I'm
here.
taking
I'm
charge of the
taking charge.
situation. Yeah.
I'm taking charge. And of course, what we're talking about is the importance of talking it through. I mean, the one thing I think, if we're talking about coping, that you must guard against doing, and of course, we were talking earlier about different personalities and so on. Some people, wear their lives on their sleeves, and it's easy for them to
To talk.
talk and talk about anything, right? And there are others who will keep that on their chest. And I think what we're both saying is, it's probably not a good idea, to hold on to this stuff. You might hold on for it for a little while, but it's probably not a good idea to do that. That you really should find a safe space, um, to talk this through. But as I said, I am sure there are people whose competence and expertise would offer a lot more, by way of um, coping mechanisms to people. I want to say this piece though. So very often, somebody in the organization would be reeling from, you know, some kind of super disturbing, disruptive, awful situation arising out of a toxic relationship, blah blah blah. And here's something I've seen a little too often. If that situation involves, again, a manager or two, what happens is this. Well, in some organizations, not the public service, have very elaborate mechanisms in place to help people cope. So sometimes there's actually a separate, like in a public service, and I think in many private companies, you go to HR. But
Yeah.
there are organizations that have a separate department, and they would give it some kind of a, you know, um,
Fancy name, a airy fairy name.
very very encouraging, and something that is going to draw you in kind of name. So employee support or something, yeah. And they put you on a, they have all kinds of names. They could call it a, so they'd set, and then they would set up a program, and then they would say, okay, well, we're going to put you on a 6 month thing, and they send you to see a health and safety occupational thing person. They send you to see a psychiatrist, yeah, blah blah blah. Here's the rub. If what started that process going in the first place was some kind of disagreement or something between you and the manager, yeah, and it's the manager who sets that up, very often that whole um, that whole plan, to send you to this one, and they think recommendations becomes a scheme, a very intricate and orchestrated scheme to actually get rid of you. I mean, the evil runs. I mean, it's evil. Okay, it runs deep, Rhoda. So what I'm saying is, sometimes even the structures that are in place to support you, they are used they are used to deal the final blow. They actually are a covert way and a way of staying out of the industrial court, um, to get rid, of it's one of the ways, the toxic environments, let's put it that way. It's one of the strategies that toxic environments employ, um, to get rid of people.
So, one of the questions that came up here was, if let's say people are going in for an interview or they're looking at applying for a job, what should they look for as their red flags to avoid working with a company?
Hmm, that is a good one. What should you look for? Hmm, I don't know. Nothing coming to mind at the moment.
Okay. On the thread, someone was suggesting like high turnover, high employment turnover.
But how would you know that in an interview?
I guess if they're researching the company, if they research the company, maybe that will come up. I see Susanna Gordon saying a high attrition rate.
But again, I'm not sure those things are revealed at the interview stage. I mean, it's a very interesting question, and
Not
I'm
necessarily
thinking,
at the interview stage, but I know that if you're looking to work for a company, so let's say
okay,
you're going to work for a company and
yes,
you might know somebody
yes,
who's working at the
yes,
company, so you start
yes,
asking questions, you start doing your
right,
own background
right,
research.
yes, 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 absolutely. Okay, right. Yeah, sorry. No, I heard interview. But yes, I agree. I agree, and it actually is a good practice to do your due diligence, yes, and to find out things like that. And a high attrition rate is one of the, I would say, red flags. Yeah, but that's interesting, because I can tell you it's only in certain places, because human beings are fascinating. They are very, very toxic places with very low attrition rates, Rhoda.
I know, I work
But
at
those, but
one.
those are so. So it's not necessarily, yeah. So because, and
let me
those are
use
often
let me use where
places.
I work as a for example, and I
Okay,
feel like I can use it as a for example, and hopefully people wouldn't be too much up in their fields. But
okay,
I work in an environment where the perks and benefits are the kind of perks and benefits that you decide, okay, you know what, I can put up with the foolish things, the bad management, the poor choices, the poor leadership, that happens around me, because there are these perks and benefits, and because there's a particular caliber of prestige and all of those things associated with what you're doing, and access to services. So I can see that persons can find that the work environment is unhealthy, it's onerous, it's not good for them, but at the same time they're like, okay, it pays off in this way. Whereas in a work environment where it's toxic and the remuneration is bad, you
exactly.
feel more compulsion to leave that situation. But in a situation where it's toxic, but the remuneration package, checks out, you're kind of like, okay, all right, well, I'll put up for it for as long as I can put up with it for.
That's exactly where I was going. It's almost as if, um, the fancy vacations, the luxury car, and so on. Um, it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off. Well, that's one way of putting it. Another way, it's almost as if, well, um, the perks, and so on, they dull the pain. They're good anesthetic. So, um, yeah, not all toxic environments have a um, revolving revolving door. I want to come back to the question about the interview. I don't know. These days, I'm becoming more and more enamored of, sort of relying on your own sense.
Instinct.
Yes, instinct and intuition. There's a fellow, God, I don't remember his name. I think his surname is Goshal. He has a really good talk on um he doesn't vocalize it in this way. He doesn't say it's toxic environments, but that's what he's talking about. And he calls it the smell of the place. And there's a sense that you can get when you go into an organization for an interview, when you sit in the lobby, when you feel the vibe, you feel the energy in a place, and when you sit before a panel. So it might sound airy fairy, but I think it's also very possible, um, to intuit and feel and sense, what a place is like. You can get the smell.
But you know something, Kathleen? I think that ability to intuit in that way will and the ability to intuit in that way and to intuit keenly in that way only
Yeah,
really comes from having worked in a number of environments like that
yeah,
and having gotten past the need to work in environments like that or the
yeah,
need for remuneration regardless whatever,
yeah,
because at my age, early 40s, there are a number of places now that in my 30s I would have worked for in a heartbeat. If there were vacancies and I would have worked for them in a heartbeat. Now
mm,
I'm like,
mm,
there I can't think of too much that I can be offered to get me to work like that now. But that's because I also I do consultancy work, and I
yes,
found that doing consultancy work along with what I do what I do now remotely at the University of the West Indies has given me a particular level of comfort and a
yes,
particular level of confidence. So
yes,
I don't feel like there are too many workspaces in Trinidad and Tobago that I would even be remotely interested in being
interested in
up.
working.
I can't
Yeah,
think of.
yeah,
I really cannot think of.
yeah, yep.
If you
That
ask me
question
right,
is,
if you ask me now, Rhoda, if you had to go and work for an organization, what's the
yeah,
organization? I cannot tell
yep,
you.
yep, yep. I hear that. That question about the interview though is bothering me, because I feel that there's stuff there. I'm remembering a couple interviews myself. There are things you can look for. Things are, there are interviews where people badger you. And I mean, these are a lot of the time is the people you're going to be working with, the, managers and so on. There's just a way that the thing is conducted.
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
look for a lot of things with interviews.
yeah,
People's body language, whether
yeah,
they start the interview on time.
yeah,
When
yeah,
I get to the office, am I offered, what kind of hospitality am I offered?
yes,
Right? Am I
yeah,
offered a glass of water? Am I
yeah,
politely shown where I can sit and that sort of
yes,
thing and wait? Am
yeah,
I given information to let me know, okay, in about 15 minutes time we will be ready to
Yes.
interview you, that
Yes.
sort of thing,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then when you get into the interview, the line of questioning, the way in which questions are asked,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the way in which they listen to my responses, those are the things that
Yes.
I'd be paying attention to.
Absolutely. Because it triggered a memory of an interview where I disagreed an assertion that I was the interviewee.
Data is data is dipping again. I may have to kick out the room. I will kick out the room and let her dial back in. So we're here with organizational analyst Kathleen Stroud, and we're talking about toxic workspaces and basically having to deal up with toxic management. We've been talking about it for about an hour at the very least, actually an hour and 15 minutes. So when she gets back into the room, I am going to bring it to a close. So that way we can go off and think about this issue. Ah, there we are. Back.
Yes. Back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was just saying that I remember there was it was a violent reaction to the challenge. Um, at the time, well, you're in an interview, whatever, but that behavior proved to be very consistent. I did get that job. Um, with how that person um, conducted himself as a manager. This was not someone who was partial to being challenged, who was open to any kind of anybody advancing a perspective that was different, uh, from him. So yeah, I mean, I think we provided a pretty impressive list of boxes that you can check at the interview stage, that might be signals that this might not be a place that you want to be in. Um, well, I don't know. It's 8:18.
No, we
Uh,
can we can wrap up. I think it's this is a good point for us to wrap up on. So if there's
yeah.
anything further you wanted to add, and then we close things off.
Well, we never got to talk about where toxic behavior comes from. Talking about people owning their stuff. um, I find so much of what we do talk about when we are
When you say owning
trying.
their stuff, what do you mean by owning their stuff?
I mean i mean having a certain amount of, and the higher up in the organization you go, the more of this I think you need to develop. Having a high degree of self-awareness, or just start to have it. Let's not even say high, of being aware of what you carry as an individual into any interaction, into any space. Your biases, your prejudices, your whatever, your story, the useful things about you, and the not so, the and that's just the tip of the iceberg. When you see um people behaving in really ugly ways in organizations, to me that is a symptom of, there's some deep areas inside of those people where they're damaged, and so that's what I mean by
So
own your stuff,
so
know your
people
stuff, know your demons.
arriving at the
Yeah.
point where they
Yeah.
are aware of where their shortcomings are, where their weaknesses are, and
Yes, but
and owning
but it's
it.
more than but it's more than weaknesses. I want to say where you're damaged, Rhoda, where you're damaged, because you have to be really damaged somewhere to call a manager into your office and ask them to put an ad in a newspaper for their job. And that's how they find out that they're about to be fired. Something inside of you um, is very hurt. And so and so it's one of the things I feel that we need to do so much better at in this society. It is around preparing people for management and leadership. And a lot of that preparation, I think, has to be around, um, deep self work, learning more and more and more um, about yourself. Because if you don't have that, you go into the workplace and you're working out all your unworked out stuff. And if you're in a managerial position, that's impacting very negatively on other people. So it's a huge responsibility, and it's something that I find. I mean, you have super bright people are promoted up the organizational ladder because they're technically good at what they do. They're brilliant at the work itself. But I don't know if we have the consciousness that when you promote someone into a managerial position, that that is a whole new competence for which they have to be prepared and developed. A whole new set of growing and learning has to be done, and a huge part of it is around knowing your stuff and knowing the bits about yourself that you need to work on. Because if you don't, you bring them into your interactions with people, and they hurt other people. That's yeah, that's the piece I think that's really important to be
So, knowing your shit and owning your shit.
in a phrase.
Kathleen,
Exactly.
thank you so much for the time with
Exactly.
us this evening.
Yeah.
Take care. Have a
My
good evening.
pleasure. My pleasure. Yes. All the best.
So that was organizational analyst Kathleen Stroud, sitting with us and us having a wide-ranging conversation about toxic behavior, what constitutes it, what leads to it, what contributes to it in an environment. In a work environment, the ways in which, because it starts at a particular level, sometimes it's hard to uproot it, the importance of the EAP programs at various institutions, whether it's public or private, taking advantage of going to these EAP programs and talking to the right people about the issues that you are facing in the workspace. Not the wrong people, the right people. And of course, you yourself knowing where your hurts are. So knowing your shit and knowing that yes, you too are hurt and damaged in particular ways and can be bringing certain behaviors to the workplace. Owning that and doing something about it. So I hope you all enjoyed the conversation this evening. I wanted to kind of switch it up from the politics and from the current affairs. But Sunday, I am going to have former Speaker of the House, Nizam Mohammed, who's also a former chairman of the Police Service Commission, join me here, and we're going to be talking about what happened in the Parliament on Thursday and, of course, the entire issue with the Police Service Commission. So I will see you all on Sunday with that interview. All right, you all enjoy the rest of your evening and enjoy your weekend. Catch you guys on Sunday evening.
Hey, give me the work, with the work, yeah. Give me the work, with the work now. Give me the work.